Welcome to Relay Chain, a podcast produced by Parity Technologies, where we discuss all things Substrate, Polkadot, and Web3. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Relay Chain. I'm here and I'm super excited. I'm here with Logan and David from Zeitgeist, a prediction market on Polkadot and Kusama. And we're going to dig deep into Zeitgeist and to find out what it's all about. But first, welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for being here. How you guys doing?
Hey, good. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Hey, Jorrin. Great to be here.
Awesome. I think Zeitgeist has been pretty under the radar for most of the part, but you guys recently closed a nice seed round, but I don't think a lot of folks really know about what Zeitgeist is. So let's start really high level and talk about what is Zeitgeist.
So Zeitgeist is an evolving blockchain for prediction markets and Futarchy. Futarchy is the application of prediction markets in a governance aspect. So we're building a layer one parachain with the core functionality of permissionlessly creating, trading, and resolving prediction markets. And then we take this core functionality of prediction markets and apply it to our on-chain governance as well. So that's a Futarchy aspect. We're building kind of the entire tech stack of a prediction market from the parachain layer, the primitives of prediction markets, up to the application. So this includes like the middleware layer as well, which is we're building an SDK for that. A lot of focus as well on like the user experience and the UI of prediction markets.
Cool. Yeah, there's so much there that I want to dig into. But before we go like too much deeper into that, I want to like know who you guys are a little bit. So Logan, I remember when I was researching Parity and Polkadot before I started working with Parity, I remember watching a bunch of videos of you because you worked with Web3 Foundation and you were in the education team. And David, I've just kind of met you and I know you've been doing a bunch of work in the prediction market space. So how did you guys come together to create Zeitgeist?
Yep, that's a good question. So I'll talk a bit about, I guess, my background and how I ended up at Web3 Foundation and then how that became Zeitgeist. So I got started in the blockchain space in like late 2016. I'd heard about Bitcoin some point before then, but what really kind of kicked off my interests was when I discovered Ethereum at late 2016. So I started just kind of learning Solidity and like researching into like what smart contracts were, and like I remember having this like moment where it was like you can create money, and like this just kind of blew my mind as something that I just had like so much power and potential to do really cool things with. So I started initially building some dApps with friends, and like was part of the computer science club at my university. So spent some time with friends I knew through there, just starting to build dApps and kind of talk about Ethereum, and just kind of jump down the rabbit hole. So after I graduated university, I started working with a company called Chronologic on a project called the Ethereum Alarm Clock, which was a decentralized scheduling protocol. Essentially, it solved this very practical need of kind of setting up the transactions beforehand and letting them execute for you at a later time. We had a whole kind of ecosystem built around that involving these decentralized actors who would execute those transactions. Yeah, I worked on that for a little while. And then going forward to like late 2018, early 2019, I was working on a new project called Convergent. And we were building a personal tokens platform using kind of bonding curves as the token emission mechanism. So it was during this time that I started to kind of hit my head against the limits of the EVM, let's say the constraints. Even while working on the Ethereum alarm clock, we had this issue where it was really expensive gas-wise to use, and there was ways you could optimize it, but they were always more of like hacks than they were like good engineering practice. So once again with Convergent, I started to kind of get in this situation where I felt like a lot of the things that would make the product better were like hacking what you could do inside of this constrained environment. So that's kind of when I started to look around and discovered Substrate. And again, had like one of these big moments where it was like, it felt to me like this was like kind of the next step of like blockchain tech and like building blockchains. So I built some early Substrate modules, and then noticed that Web3 Foundation was hiring some positions. I think I completed like a bounty for them, and then got hired in the technical education department. So initially, I worked on building out the Polkadot wiki, which was at that time didn't exist. Yeah, wrote a bunch of content for that. Worked a bit on like Substrate docs themselves as well. But then as kind of things moved on, I started to get pulled more into like tooling and kind of building some of the operational stuff around the Kusama and Polkadot launches. After that happened, I also got involved with like validator ecosystem. Helped to kind of set up and run the 1,000 validators program with Will from Parity for a while. Then around the beginning of this year, so beginning of 2021, got to the point where I'd kind of been thinking about prediction markets for a while. Ever since I got into the space, like Augur was like one of my favorite projects at the time, and I'd kind of been a fan and in the community over the years, just kind of in the background, kind of eagerly waiting for a really good prediction market to pop up. So after kind of not seeing this and going through this kind of experience of building different things at different times and kind of progressing through blockchain tech, I kind of saw this fit of prediction markets as an application or protocol, and Substrate as a technology to bring this protocol to fruition. Started to kind of work on Zeitgeist during nights and weekends, and then earlier this year left Web3 Foundation to work on it full time.
Sweet. And David, how did you two link up with this project?
Sure. So going back a bit, I got involved in prediction markets back in 2004. So I've been interested in politics pretty much my whole life. And after the consternation around the 2000 election with the uncertainty, I figured there had to be a better way. So I thought about that for a period of time, but it wasn't until 2004 I was reading the book The Wisdom of Crowds, and it talked about prediction markets and how the many are smarter than the few, and if you can harness this information, that it's very powerful. That led me to Robin Hanson, who's the originator of prediction markets, and I was very interested in setting up a political project. And so I asked Robin if he had any software available. He said, you should meet this guy, Ken Kitlitz. And so Ken and Robin built the first prediction market in existence back in the early 90s. And so Ken and I met at a conference at Rutgers and hit it off, and we decided to start a company together called Consensus Point. And the first project we started was the political project called the Washington Stock Exchange, where we ran markets on elections, policy, different events in the political space that ended up being very effective and successful. And that led to companies reaching out to us. GE became our first customer, and we worked with several dozen Fortune 500 size enterprises and organizations of different sizes. And so I've spent, the bulk of my career in prediction markets. After Consensus Point, I spent some time on a next-gen prediction market system for the U.S. government. Around that time, Bitcoin was emerging, was very interested in that, but didn't become professionally involved in the space until Ethereum came along. I was very fascinated to see what Augur was doing, what Gnosis was doing. I actually reached out to Gnosis to partner with them on some ideas, and they were very supportive, and in fact introduced me to Consensus, where I went to work for a few years on product strategy and working with the teams there. But I met Chris Hutchinson, Hutch, who is the CMO here at Zeitgeist several years ago, and of course he was at the Web3 Foundation. And in the last year or so, I was telling him my interest in developing a prediction market product. And so we had been discussing that just on and off. And then he happened to mention that he knew this guy, Logan, who just left the foundation to work on a prediction market platform. So the three of us got together and, the rest is history.
Awesome. Like all great stories. It's not always what you know. Of course, that's a strong part of it, but it's who you know and the connectors that all bring everything together. So that's great. That's a great story to hear. Okay, so you guys mentioned Futarchy, and I think we went quickly past that. I think that was a new topic for me, a new word for me, and I think it's going to be new for a bunch of people. So let's really try and clarify what is Futarchy and what does that mean within the context of Zeitgeist.
So with Zeitgeist, what we want to do is we want to kind of push prediction markets further. And what we see as one way to apply prediction markets further than they've been taken before is to apply them to on-chain governance in a binding way. So not only to use the signals to inform governance decisions, but to actually use prediction market signals to implement rules into what proposals can get passed, when proposals don't get passed, when proposals get halted for some time. So what Futarchy is really just using prediction markets for governance. And yeah, we have a few different ways that we're thinking this will look, but maybe I'll let David talk a bit more about it too before we go into the details.
Yeah, definitely. So with Futarchy, it allows you to aggregate information for the purpose of decision making. So you decide some outcome of success that you want, whether it's a development milestone or security, uptime, or whatever this outcome is, and then you have a variety of ways to get there. So if you're a development team working on a new product, and you're really obviously concerned with the impact that product's going to have on the uptime of the network, and so you can basically make a bet on how we go about implementing this product and its probability of affecting the network negatively. And so it allows you to get decision contingent outcomes, basically answers the question of what would happen if we did this. If we have a problem that we're solving, some sort of knowledge problem, and different ways of going about solving that problem, what's the most effective way? And what we've seen is Futarchy and prediction markets are the best mechanism that we know of when you compare all other approaches of answering that question. And that's been borne out many times.
I find that super fascinating. So, because like when I think of traditional prediction markets, it's very much like it's a form of gambling. It's a betting. It's like what outcome is going to happen, and you're kind of putting your money where your mouth is there. But in this case, it seems like it's betting on things that quote unquote really matter, potentially having like real world implications on the outcome of this. I think that's super fascinating. Okay, so you guys mentioned that you're building on Substrate, and for some of the folks that are listening, maybe this is the first time learning about this, but Substrate's a way for you to build bespoke blockchains that are specific to your use case. And so for the use case of Zeitgeist, what is your kind of recipe for your blockchain? Like there's different pallets that you can put together. What kind of pallets are you guys using, and are you developing your own pallets?
Yeah, we are. So with Substrate, yeah, you have the ability to both like go into the internals of the chain and modify like very like low level pieces like the transaction pool, the way blocks are produced and so on. You also have like the runtime code, which is like what's actually being ran inside of a block. So we are building our own pallets. So the pallets are kind of these modules that you put together to create your full runtime. So the pallets we're building are centered around prediction markets, of course. So we have kind of a few pallets that we're working on. We have like a core prediction market pallet, and this kind of has the logic of creating markets, and then it contains like the interface of resolving them and disputing them. But we're also creating separate pallets for the dispute mechanism. We kind of take an approach where we have a bit of flexibility under like how markets, first of all, how they're reported. So how the oracle first puts the result of the market, but then also how the oracle is secured, which means like under a dispute, how does the chain come to consensus on what the result will be? How can everyone agree on what the result will be? So we were building some palettes for this. We have one that we're calling kind of like simple disputes, and it's really just a game of putting more and more stake behind a result until the other side kind of gives up. And then we're also building something a bit more robust called the court pallet. And the idea of the court pallet is that we want to kind of economically incentivize actors of the protocol. So anyone can join the court by putting some stake there. And when someone creates a dispute, they put a bond and they create a court case. So when they create a court case, we draw a random subset of these staked users, and we basically ask them to come to consensus between themselves. In case that's disputed again, we have like an escalation mechanism. So we allow further court cases, each time taking a larger subset of these staked users. And at some point, we get to a cap. We say it's been enough court cases. So it's a parameter in the runtime. I think it's set to 6. So after 6 court cases, we pull that into like a chain-wide vote. So it becomes available for anyone to kind of say what they think is the correct outcome. So that's part of it. But we're also building pallets for trading as well. So we're building AMM pallets, automated market makers, one based on kind of the balancer formula and another based on the LMSR formula, which was invented by Robin Hanson as well. And we've been doing some research on how we can improve this specifically for our use case. Also, we've been, I think as far as I know, we're the first to actually be implementing it in a blockchain context. I know some projects have tried this before, but there's always been kind of major challenges that make it not practical on the EVM. So we've been working on solving these challenges and implementing it as a substrate pallet. And then we're also using some of the frame pallets, right? So this substrate comes with a collection of modules, and we're also using a number of those as well in our chain.
Awesome. So it seems like you guys you're deep into the substrate weeds there, and you're hacking away and building building the parachute as you're going. That sounds awesome. Okay, so you talked about a couple things there. First of all, like I was kind of surprised to see automated market makers working in this space. And so maybe you can kind of talk about how that fits into a prediction market framework, because the way I traditionally have seen automated market makers is more of a used for fungible tokens and trading them and creating bonding curves to derive the value of certain things. So how does that work in the context of a prediction market?
Yeah, so I mean the core concepts are the same. So with prediction markets, you create tokens that represent the outcome. So we're able to use these tokens to provide liquidity in automated market maker, and for other people to come and trade using that provided liquidity. So the core concept is the same. There's a difference in kind of like the risks of providing liquidity in prediction markets versus the risk of providing liquidity in like just some coin pair, right? Like ETH and DAI, let's say. And the risk is what's called impermanent loss. So this exists also in any coin pair, but in prediction markets, it's a bigger problem. And the reason for that is because at some point, the outcomes become known, and one of the tokens, the value will essentially go to 0, which means that the provided liquidity, so the people who initially provided the liquidity, essentially some part of the value that they put in will essentially disappear, and people will pull as much value as they can out. It's a problem that all prediction markets face that use AMMs, and it's the reason we're doing so much research into new AMM models. So specifically on the LMSR AMM or the LMSR based AMM, that we're working on that we've kind of codenamed Rakido. And we're continuing to do further research on it. We're putting together now kind of like a best practices guide on how to provide liquidity to prediction markets to reduce those risks. And we're looking at how we can modify the AMM to make it harder for liquidity providers to kind of shoot themselves in the foot when providing liquidity.
Okay, that makes sense. I think it might be useful here to maybe go through a test example. I know you guys recently did a test net called Kusama Derby, where we're looking at, you were playing a game basically to kind of predict who was going to get the first parachain slots. That might be a good example to kind of walk through, or maybe we can even make it simpler and devise like a more straightforward kind of example for like the flow of how a prediction market starts, people interact with the contract, then it gets resolved, and then maybe how it could be potentially challenged afterwards. Does that make sense?
So I guess it makes sense to use the Derby as an example here because it's something we can relate to. I think hopefully everyone listening to this call can relate to the parachain auctions. So with the Kusama Derby, and just quickly was so the testnet's actually called Battery Park, and the Derby was our kind of testnet campaign. So what we were doing with the Derby was we wanted to preview the tech while at the same time kind of like building out a community and getting people to come use it. So we can kind of solve through any bugs and practice with deployment and so on, stuff like that. So what we decided to do was set up 3 markets, one for each of the first 3 parachain slots, and make this our campaign. Yeah, so to explain how like a prediction market works. When you create a market, you attach to it some metadata, and this metadata is essentially what this market's about. So for the Derby market, let's say the first parachain slot auction market, the question inside of this metadata was who will win the first Kusama parachain slot. And then each of the outcomes were one of the teams that were one of the first 10 teams who connected to Rococo. So you had Karura, Moon River, Shiden, and so on. And so with the prediction market, you're able to generate a full set of these outcome tokens by exchanging one base unit token. And the reason that's possible and like the reason that works is because at the end of the market, the winning outcome is redeemable for one base unit. So at the beginning, you don't know who's going to win, so you can create one of each for one base unit because later just one of them will be worth that and the rest are worth 0. So what's interesting about the prediction market is what happens between not knowing which one is going to win and knowing. And this is where the market dynamics and the market mechanism comes into play. So people will trade the market, and the outcome token's price will reflect the probability of that outcome being the one that happens. So in the Derby, at different times we had like Karura. Well, actually, what we had was for the first market, Karura was a kind of an early leader, but there was other ones like Shiden, for instance, changed a lot throughout the whole time, and it changed from like 0.10 base units, which would be 10% probability, to up to like 30.3, which would be 30% probability. And there's a lot of ways for traders to analyze the markets and kind of move the probabilities to be closer to what they think will happen. And kind of the power of the prediction market is that you're aggregating all of these viewpoints and you're providing incentive for them to provide their knowledge in a public arena. So there's various ways to arbitrage different outcomes, and it's essentially a freely traded market. And then at the end, so usually you specify like when the market will end, so when it expires. And so when the market expires, you also specify who's going to be submitting the results, so who the oracle of this market will be. So when the market ends, the oracle should submit its result. And there's a 24-hour window where the oracle can submit the result. The reason it's a 24-hour window is because it's possible that the oracle doesn't show up. And in the case that the oracle doesn't show up, the market creator had placed a bond. So the market creator actually gets part of their bond slashed because they picked a bad oracle. And then it's just open to anyone to submit a result at that point. So just someone who wants to volunteer to say what their result is can submit a result. After that, we have kind of this dispute resolution mechanism. So if someone else says, "Hey, that's not the result. I don't think it's A. I think it's B," they can put some bond down and say it's B. And depending on which dispute resolution mechanism, we either enter into the court or we enter into simple disputes, or potentially another mechanism that we develop later on.
Cool. And then you mentioned earlier on that like that can go for several rounds of increasing jurors, and then eventually if you push it to its limits, you evoke everybody to be a juror, and then we for sure will figure out kind of the true wisdom of the crowd. Okay, so that makes sense. I guess my next question is that works in a perfect world very well for like empirical things. So like, for example, we know for sure that Corora won the first slot. It's unequivocal. But are prediction markets as useful for things that are subjective? Like, can we say, like, can I open up a market and say, Relay Chain is the best blockchain podcast of all time? And can we actually come to a reasonable conclusion of whether or not that's true using this prediction market?
So yeah, actually, prediction markets do that very well. And in my experience, I've seen a lot of applications over the years on prediction markets applied to product development and market research. So as you're thinking about which products to build, you're doing a survey of the market and trying to find that product market fit of like, we could build this, we could build that, and we worked with a few mobile device companies, and you have a lot of decisions to make on the size of the screen, the processor, the battery size, the enclosure, and there's no wrong answer or necessarily right answer, but what you want to do is based on the objectives that you have on, like, say, revenue or your development timeline, you can use the prediction market to help decide these metrics. And so prediction markets can be used for aggregating opinions about subjective data. Ultimately, you do have a objective measure to judge the subjective. Like, at some point, we're going to end this market, and then we're going to use a way of analyzing the market, the subjective trades in an objective way. But yeah, you definitely can use markets in subjective contexts.
Okay. And doing some research here, there's this concept of like the Keynesian kind of beauty contest thing where it's like nested layers of game theory where people participating are incentivized to provide an answer, but knowing that other people are also going to provide an answer, you're incentivized to pick the answer that you think everybody else is going to pick. So how does that kind of play in? And are there any mechanisms or levers in Zeitgeist that kind of mitigate these things? Or is that a true prediction market? Is that healthy for a prediction market?
Sure. Well, I mean, that's a great question. And what I described a moment ago is a Keynesian beauty contest of, like, for building a phone, should we have a large screen or a large battery, or and helping you decide those trade-offs. But that's why you want to have an objective measure, like a completion date or revenue. Like, you can ask the question in a market, which are cooler, red shirts or blue shirts? And you can run a market on that for, let's say, a month. And at the end of the month, you're going to do a payoff. And let's just say the blue shirts are trading higher based on some sort of volume weighted average price over the last week, just like you would do for a survey or an opinion, focus group. You were to ask that question. You could aggregate the same information in a prediction market. What's different about a prediction market is if the reason you were doing that is because you wanted to make the most money, from whatever the shirt color is or whatever you're deciding, then prediction market's going to help you answer that question most effectively. And so there are other mechanisms that we can bring to bear. There's something called a Bayesian truth serum that is very effective at helping measure and reduce these biases. There, as long as you think about it up front, you can design your incentives accordingly.
I see. Okay. Let's talk about some of the other use cases for Zeitgeist, and maybe getting into like some of the more real world cases. David, you mentioned you are very interested in politics, and we've heard a lot in recent times about, the election process and finding out the true wisdom of the crowd, the true will of the people. So how do you see prediction markets in general and Zeitgeist playing into this kind of problem?
And definitely, politics is a great domain. And so, if you think about it, when a political market has several, like an election, has several gates that you get through. There's a nomination process, there's fundraising milestones, and then there's a general election, and at say presidential level, there's different state contests. And so, what you want to do is, as a candidate or as a party, is pick your candidate that will ultimately win the election. And that candidate may not be the obvious choice when you're talking about, say, at the primary level. And so we've seen examples where, there's a really popular candidate. If you're running just a sort of a Keynesian beauty contest on just like who's popular right now, you'd have one answer. But if you looked at it in light of the sort of broader general election, it would be a different answer. So that's a really good contrast of how prediction markets contrast with something like, say, opinion polling, where a poll asks you, if the election were held today, who would you vote for? But a prediction market is asking, when the election is held, who do you think will win? And so to go back to the Kusama Derby example, if we ran a survey about that, we would have just asked, well, who do you want to win the slot versus who do you think's going to win? So, incentives matter. And so when money is on the line, people have an incentive to pick what they think is the actual outcome versus the outcome that they want. And so it's got a lot of relevance in the political domain for sure.
Yeah, I think that's something that's super attractive to me in blockchain in general. I'm a huge fan of governance over governments. And I wonder if we actually need these representatives, like if we need to vote for a single person to make decisions, and whether or not something like Zeitgeist or a prediction market can be used on a more granular level to determine what our government's policy should be. Like, should we have higher taxes, lower taxes, any kind of decision normally that a government would make? Is it feasible to do that with a prediction market on a more granular level? And it's less about an individual making these decisions, and it's more about the consistent will of the people.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. One of our key goals for Zeitgeist in regards to politics is to be a mechanism for generating policy advice. And so as we do that and we build up a track record on providing signals about which policy would yield the most advantageous outcome, then we expect that savvy politicians will look at that and follow that. And then if they don't, then there's a very robust mechanism providing advice, and we can ask them, hey, why are you not following this policy advice when it's consistently yielding accurate intelligence? And so we think that's very interesting. Politics, we're less interested in necessarily making the existing system more efficient than we are in helping more people get engaged in politics and just having the whole process be more transparent.
Absolutely. Yeah. Transparency is key, and blockchain aids that perfectly. Okay. Let's talk about the types of prediction markets, because I know you guys support at least 3 types. There's categorical, scalar, and combination. What do those mean, and like what are their use cases?
With Zeitgeist, we're aiming to build like the primitives of prediction markets. So we want to cover all the types of prediction markets that we can. So with categorical markets, what you have is you just have a number of separate outcomes, so categories of outcomes. So this can range from in the most simple form, two outcomes. So yes or no, what's commonly known as like a binary market. It can either happen or it doesn't, or up to potentially 10 or more outcomes. So this is what we used for the Derby, for instance, and each outcome was a different parachain team. That's one type of market. But another market is a scalar market. Some markets you don't want to pick between outcomes because you could potentially have a whole range of outcomes, like a whole. It could be 0, it could be 100,000, it could be any point between that. Usually financial markets, for instance. So predicting the price of an asset in the future would be on a range. You would set a minimum and a maximum, and then the market would create a prediction between those 2 points. And then I think, probably the most interesting one is the combinatorial market, which I'll let David talk about.
Yeah, so combinatorial markets basically allow for composable prediction markets, which is something we haven't seen in the crypto space yet. We're excited to be supporting that. And so you can imagine as a project working on their platform and has markets on deciding things like what features should we build, is the impact on the security of the network based on these features. We want to increase the transaction throughput, the number of addresses, and other dimensions. And so in a typical prediction market, you'd have all of these as individual markets, and that's the same thing with Zeitgeist. But with combinatorics, you can actually link all these things together to have a composable prediction market. So you can get an answer about optimizing over these dimensions. So it'll tell you what features will have the best security and with the best transaction throughput, for example. And so it's a very powerful mechanism that is vastly more valuable than traditional prediction markets, and we're really excited about it.
Very interesting. Could you give like an example of like where a combinatorial market would be used?
Sure. So going back to politics, let's say you're trying to pick a candidate based on how they're going to. There's a market on the primary election. There's a market on different states, like in the New Hampshire or South Carolina primary. And so what you want to do is, if we pick candidate A, what's the probability that they will make it through the primary as well as both of these states? And then candidate B, what's the probability that they will make it through both South Carolina and New Hampshire? And then based on those prices, you could see, wow, we had this really front runner that's going to primary well, but they're not going to make it through these other early contests. So we can have the security of picking maybe the less obvious choice that's actually going to do better in the general election. And so you could also think about it in terms of, let's say, a basketball bracket where you have, the final four. And in addition to, picking which team is going to win it, each bracket, you're actually picking who's going to win at the sort of semifinal, final, and like championship match, all in a series.
I see. So it allows more granular, more sophisticated kind of knowledge.
Right, and composability.
Awesome. That makes more sense. Very cool. So you guys said that you're building an SDK and you're going to allow apps essentially to plug into Zeitgeist. And so does that mean like anybody can have their own front end and ask their own questions and use Zeitgeist as the back end for that?
Exactly. That's the goal. So Zeitgeist is a permissionless protocol. So we encourage people to build their own front ends. And the purpose of building the SDK is to make this as easy as possible for entrepreneurs or builders to come in who might have a really good idea and just to quickly set up their prediction market based application. So yeah, by no means is the SDK required. You could always access the chain directly using like the Polkadot.js API directly. The SDK just aims to provide like a guided way to do that, and a way to do it quicker with kind of more safety measures turned on.
Right. So I guess through that, is that a way by which an organization, a startup, or a community can introduce Futarchy into their own governance structure?
Yeah, definitely. Like there's two different sides of this. There's a side where it's like futarchy by signal only. So this is you kind of honor the prediction markets and the signals that you're getting from them, but there's no kind of enforceability there. And then the other side is like futarchy that is enforced. So since we're building prediction markets in like the native layer, we can use prediction markets and enforce different ways proposals will take place. And what we want to do with Zeitgeist is to first demonstrate this out on our own chain. And then ideally, as it's theorized, this is a augmentation to governance. And so other projects would come and use it as well. And lately we've been talking to some people, like just brainstorming how this could work. And the cool part about building in the Polkadot ecosystem and deploying to Kusama is that with XCM, we could actually do this for other chains too. So if it is something that we prove out on Zeitgeist that is useful, potentially any parachain, if they opt into it, could have enforceable futarchy as well. Yeah, and then further on, we would support DAOs that could do that as well on Zeitgeist.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a very attractive piece of Substrate in the Polkadot ecosystem is that it's so composable. And with XCM, that's really like the magic of it. And I can imagine how parachains would be able to leverage Zeitgeist in the future. So that's super awesome. What else are you guys excited about? Like what's on the horizon for you? How do you see, Zeitgeist changing the world?
Yeah, so I mean, most of our effort at the moment is spent on building an application that's going to have really good UI UX and is going to be able to be something that people will come and use and they want to use. I think we've seen prediction markets in the past, prediction markets on blockchain kind of be plagued by this curse of bad usability. And we want to make sure that the Zeitgeist application is dead simple to use, super simple to just come in. If you have some information, you can use that information in a market. So we're super excited to ship that soon. We're still actively working on it, but it's kind of the next thing that we want to kind of push out the door while still in this testnet phase that we're in. And then of course we're super excited for mainnet launch later in this year when we're planning to deploy as a parachain to Kusama.
Sweet. And so, yeah, you're planning on doing an initial launch on Kusama. Is there any ideas of whether or not you will go for a slot on Polkadot as well, or do you think Kusama is particularly catered to your needs?
Yeah, so I mean, we're big fans of Kusama. We like the kind of very move fast and break things, like chaos, embrace the chaos ethos of Kusama. We think it's a good fit for Zeitgeist. We're not ruling out the potential of a Zeitgeist Polkadot deployment in the future, but we're only planning to deploy Zeitgeist mainnet to Kusama. We're going to do that. We're going to focus on our Kusama deployment and then see how things might change in the future. We're thinking now that with the Kusama Polkadot bridge, when that's available, we'll have interoperability in the wider Polkadot ecosystem. Yeah, it's not something we're ruling out, but it's also not something that we're seeing as super critical for Zeitgeist.
Makes sense. So yeah, you mentioned that you've got Battery Park running. That's your test net, and the Kusama Derby recently concluded. What's the next kind of step? Are you going to do a couple more campaigns on the test net before launching your main project on Kusama, or like what do folks listening have to look forward to there?
Yeah, so we are planning to do another campaign, not like in the next month, like not in the very immediate term, but not too far out either. Like before mainnet, we will hold another campaign. So the community essentially gives the community a chance to kind of get to use Zeitgeist. Before we do that, we do want to do the kind of main application that we're working on. So with the Derby, since we have the main application is still kind of being worked on, we deployed kind of a preview of the application. So the next step for us is to actually build the generalized application where people can not only trade the markets, but also create the markets. And once we have that, once we ship that on the testnet, we're going to hold another campaign and go through the whole rounds of getting people to use it, break it, solve bugs in preparation for our mainnet deployment.
Perfect. So I know you guys are working on a white paper as well. Do you have any hints on when that will be released and we can sink our teeth into it?
Yeah, so we don't have a date on that. We do have like the most of the meat drafted out there. The only reason we haven't published it yet is because we still have some kind of more research aspects that we want to work into it. So with some of the recent stuff we've published on Rakido, as well as some of the stuff we want to publish on combinatorics as well. So yeah, expect it soon, but there's no date.
Soon TM, very classic. It's definitely known in the blockchain space. So we'll be waiting and watching. Where would be the best place to keep up to date with the project? Where will all the announcements be released?
Yep. So we have all of the traditional social media channels. You can find us on Twitter at Zeitgeist PM. Our website is zeitgeist.pm. PM short for prediction market. From the website, you could find our Telegram room, our Discord server, which is kind of our main community. That's where they are. And then, of course, our newsletter is probably the best place to sign up and to make sure you stay up to date on any new events we might be having.
Great. And you guys you're a small but growing organization. I noticed that you guys are hiring right now. Do you want to put a call out to the community, the type of folks that you're looking for?
Sure. So we have a couple job posts open. We're looking for a really solid designer who likes to do kind of branding and marketing sides of things, as well as take bites out of the UI UX part. We're also on the search for a really good TypeScript developer who likes to work more on the back end of things, not really on the front end. And this is to help us architect and build out the SDK and kind of other tooling that we'll need. And then one that we are looking for, but we haven't put a post up yet. We haven't fully defined it, but something like a head of prediction. So this is someone who will be kind of taking ownership over when we do have the prediction markets live, taking ownership over kind of moving them forward and kind of not only doing that, but also like coming up with interesting market ideas and creating new markets and kind of promoting these to the communities in different ways.
That sounds like a very interesting role. I feel like a prerequisite in order to apply for that is you need to have like a crystal ball or something like that consistently. It might be a magic 8-ball to consult with everything, but head of prediction is awesome. I love the sound of that. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for being here today. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we head off for the day?
It's all good from my end.
Yeah, anything for you, David?
No, I was just going to say thanks very much, and I really enjoyed the conversation, Jorrin.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. Really enjoyed the conversation and really excited to follow Zeitgeist as it continues to grow. And I think prediction markets are a super fascinating topic and can't wait to see it all come to life. Thank you very much again. Have a good day.
Well, thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Relay Chain. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the subjects we talked about today, so please reach out to us on Twitter @RelayChain or by email podcast@parity.io. The team at Parity has some of the brightest minds working towards building a robust and inclusive ecosystem that puts power back into the hands of its community members. With cross-chain communication as a primary goal, we aim to break down the tribalistic barriers that have formed throughout the blockchain industry. If you want to learn more about what we're building, or if you want to join our team, visit our website at parity.io and sign up for our newsletter at parity.io/.